Hello, who has not seen the latest headlines showing that we have environmental catastrophes which are multiplying all over the planet at a speed which is increasing? These particular events, which are multiplying, are obviously due to some changes in the way in which the planet behaves. So people are fighting each other as to what makes it happen. But I think we are all very conversant with the fact that temperatures are becoming more extreme, usually towards heat, but also towards storms which are gaining in intensity. And we are seeing phenomena which are threatening the very livelihood of us human on the planet. Because should we say that we've already made an awful lot of things happen, such thing as total mass extinctions of large swaths of biodiversity. And this action that we, as human, have created on the planet has a name. It's a name of a new geological era. This geological era is called the Anthropocene, from anthropo, man, human, and scene, which means new. So the new things which have been captured via the activity and the soul activity of human beings. And so some people will say, well, actually, things have been changing from the beginning of times. There has been different geological eras which have taken place. And so there is nothing new about the fact that there is change. And indeed, they would be right, except that the rate of changes which has taken place in the last 100 or 150 years, if one wants to be on the larger side, has nothing to do with what has taken place over millennium in the past in the known history of the Earth. Unless, of course, a meteorite has hit the planet with the consequences that we know of. However, there is something going on. And the purpose of this video is for us really to start looking at what is happening, because one sees that people are moving into two different types of categories. On the one hand, some people are extremely aware of changes and are saying that the way we are going about living, the way we are going about the climate, the way we are going about consuming, the way we are going about biodiversity extinctions means that we are very near a collapse, and a collapse of proportions which could bring about the end even of human life, or life as we know it on the planet. And then you have a different publicum which says, well, actually, everything is fine. We're still eating and drinking and be merry. And if there is something which needs fixing, well, they, whoever they are, can find out what it is and go and fix it for us. And between those two, the little mind map that I've prepared for you is supposed to help you think more intensely on what is really going on with the planet, what's really happening for us as a species, what are we doing to the planet, and is there a solution? Can we do something about the changes which are taking place at such a speed that even scientists are taken by surprise? So we're going to start with a little bit of historical background. The Anthropocene is the era which has finished the previous era, which was called the Holocene, which lasted for about 11,700 years and was marked by a climate which was relatively mild and propitious to life on Earth, neither too hot nor too cold, with extremes which were not extreme in the middle part of the planet. So here we'll need to move on to something else. Stop and record that part. So what does it mean for us? Well, it basically means that you can't have business as usual. And business as usual is something that we like because we don't have to do something about it. So really the changes that we see when we look at climate, for example, whatever is causing the extreme in climate, something is causing it. And it has starting to have tremendous repercussions. And these repercussions are not something that we, up till fairly recently, and I'm recording this at the beginning of August 2019, until fairly recently, the media has been pretty stum about these changes that are taking place all around us, save a few articles on the ice cap, which are melting a bit faster than they thought, but not really going into the depth of understanding what is really causing the whole of this situation. However, what it means for us is we can't ignore it. We can't ignore it even if we are not sure whether we can stop whatever it is which is causing the great changes that we are looking at. And I'm talking about, again, not only the climate, extreme heat, extreme cold, or extreme weather patterns, but I'm also talking about what's going on the surface of the earth. For example, very few people are talking about the destructions of the soils. And without soils, well, there is no vegetation. And if there is no vegetation, then there is no food. And if there is no food, there is no biodiversity. Or rather, if there is no biodiversity because it couldn't feed on what usually is the flora of their particular habitat, well, then there is no food which can be pollinated for us humans and for the ecosystem that we have created of farm animals that are being raised for our consumption. So, can we stop what is happening? Or can we slow it down? Or can we even reverse it? These are questions that are really primordial questions because it relates to our survival as a species and the species and the survival of the planet. So even if we're not sure what's causing it, one thing is for sure that ignoring it is a very bad idea because we have at least problems which are showing itself as threefold. Really, up till now, unless you were particularly interested in the environment, very few of us have really gone down to the details of what is happening on a day-to-day basis to the planet. I live in a mountain area, and this year I'm particularly shocked. There are absolutely none, zero insects flying about. And I live in the middle of the mountains where normally the air is buzzing at this time of the year with all kinds of insects. It's crawling on the ground. It's all over the flowers. And this year, there is nothing. Not even the windows are getting dirty in your car when you travel, even in the evening. Yesterday, we drove about 500 kilometers and we arrived home in the middle of the night and there was not even one insect on the windscreen, which is unheard of for any of us who have lived and been outside for any length of time. So we really need to understand that something is happening and we are not really paying attention to it. So we have remained dangerously unaware of the real situation. The infos that we're getting are really either hugely warped or they are totally incomplete. Let me talk about how warped they are. We know, for example, that we have a huge pollution problem. In fact, there is nothing that we haven't touched which hasn't really gone terribly wrong, whether you're looking at the air, whether you're looking at the soils, which have been polluted both by agrochemical poisons and by industrial waste, whether we're looking at the oceans, which are, as we all know, I think by now, completely filled up with, again, industrial waste and a lot of plastic, which are causing havoc and killing every bit of life in the ocean. And should we be reminded that life actually comes from the ocean? So if we are killing life in the ocean, what does it tell us for our survival? So we are not really being told all of this. It's not up into our day consciousness in the same way as every little political frick-flock is being thrown into our face ad nauseum in circles and buckles 24 hours a day. So really, we are being very negligent about understanding our environment and understanding the consequences of the changes in our environment for ourselves. And then the next thing is that scientists themselves don't know how to handle the gravity of the situation. So first of all, there was a lot of people who said, well, no, actually, this is not really the cause of, we don't really need to worry, we're going to fix it. And people still are saying that in some circles by trying to make things even worse, as in climate engineering. And unfortunately, the situation is such that they are now realizing that the changes in the biosphere are happening much, much faster than they ever thought would be possible, and therefore are understanding that. So the next thing is that scientists themselves don't really know how to handle the gravity of this situation. On the one hand, for a very long time, people have underestimated the rate of changes in the biosphere, be it in the level of pollution, be it in the level of changes in the ice cap, being in the levels of release of methane in the atmosphere or CO2. Everybody has been saying, well, this is not a problem that we are going to have basically in our lifetime, so let's let somebody else deal with it yet again. However, in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last year or so, the rate of changes have been so great that people have had to sit up and take notice. The ice cap is melting much, much faster than has ever been predicted. And with the melting of the ice cap come not only the problem of the rising of the oceans, but much more importantly, questions such as the release of those terribly dangerous gases for all forms of life on the planet, such as methane, is happening at an enormously fast speed. And we don't really know up to how long it will take for the methane levels to be so large as to literally explode and engulf the planet into a huge ball of fire. So these are not things that one should be taken lightly. They are not things that should be ignored, because they are things which are now happening within our lifetimes and certainly will happen within the lifetimes of our own children. So not knowing actually won't make the issues go away, and it won't shield us from them, because whether we like it or not, the weather is getting hotter and colder. Whether we like it or not, there are more storms. Whether we like it or not, people who are in low-lying areas are getting flooded more often. There's more landslides, there are more fires, there are more extreme events than at any other recorded times in history. So if we say, well, actually, I don't know about it and it will be fine, it's really is not a very sensible way to look at things. And it's not on the top of it going to stop any of those chains of events from unfolding and taking place. The problem is that we have really been accustomed to lay the blame on somebody else. And what we're seeing today is a really catastrophic situation whereby people spend their time blaming politicians, blaming industrialists, blaming the other party, blaming the whites, the blacks, the yellows, blaming the migrants, blaming the non-migrants, blaming whoever happens to be a prey for their wrath for whatever is going on. And they spend their time saying, well, we should do this and they shouldn't do that and they shouldn't say that and it's not right and so on and so forth. But that doesn't actually solve anything, because getting distracted with events which are not related to taking action personally on the history of the earth and our personal history is not going to lead us anywhere except in the path of total destructions, because the problem is not outside. The problem really is inside. It's a fact that if politicians are doing stupid things, we have elected them, whether they are right or left, whether they're in the middle, whether they're extreme, whether they're not extreme. People have allowed these situations to develop. And so we are reaping the consequences of these actions. And it really, once again, doesn't matter which side politicians are on. It's not the matter of the rich doing this or the rich flying airplanes and we aren't, etc. We still go to the supermarket and we still buy stuff which is wrapped up in plastic, which we jolly well know is going to end up in our environment, whether it's in the air, whether it's in the rain, because now, believe it or not, it rains plastic, whether it's in the stomach of animals, whether on land or in the sea or in the air. We all know that the products that we, not the politicians, not the rich, not the poor, we ourselves are going to go and buy in the supermarket, wrapped up in plastic, are going to continue to make the situation worse. We keep on buying stuff which come from the other side of the world at stages which they are not normally produced in our neck of the wood. And these products have had to come to us in some way or other. So either they came by sea, and we know that big containers, boats, are the most polluting on the planet, or they came by air, and that's not any better. Now, can you offset carbon? A completely stupid story. Because whether you offset it or not, it's been created. And if it's created, you have to deal with it. And you don't deal with it virtually. You have to deal with it correctly. We go and we want spaces to build new houses. So we go and deforest. We go and drain wetlands. We go and massacre the biodiversity just because it makes sense for us to live close to where we work. But we don't think about the consequences of it. So there are a myriad, an absolute myriad of examples that one could take whereby if we were to start taking responsibility for our own actions, which starts off with knowing what's going on, then probably the situation wouldn't be as bad as it is today and would not carry on going on as bad as what it is today. So what is it that's created the issue? So as we've seen, there is always this attitude that we have that it's a personal thing, it's always somebody else's fault. It's XYZ, it's the rich, it's the other side of the world, it's the terrorist, it's the industrialist, it's whatever. But once again, we are not educating ourselves to what's going on, and therefore we are not taking any actions. If I challenge you to open your fridge and look what's in it, if I challenge you to see how many stuff you're going to be throwing away because you bought too much of something and you're not finally using it and it's going to end up in the bin, whereas maybe a couple of blocks away, people are literally starving in the street. So we have a totally weird way of spending our resources, most of which are going to waste, before they even got to waste, they've created absolute havoc in the biodiversity and in the ecology of the systems around us. Think about creating all those plantations of oil. We cut forest literally to create palm oil. Palm oil is something terrible for health in the first instance, and secondly, it is terrible because it had to be grown on areas which were covered by pristine forest, which were the lungs of the planet. We do know that, and yet how many of us are actually looking in the products that we're buying whether palm oil is part or not of the products that we are buying? And because if we did, I can tell you that your shopping trolleys would be remarkably empty, because there is hardly anything which has not got palm oil derivative in it. And the logic of it is non-existent. It's pure distractions from beginning to end. So who is responsible of that? Not the people who are making the products, because if people were not buying the products, they wouldn't be making them. So once again, somewhere along the line, we have to take responsibility for what's going on. And it's not somebody else's fault. It always starts with, how do we, as people, act, learn, educate ourselves, think, reflect, analyze, and then act? So within this, one of the things that we see is totally unbridled consumerism. All our society is based on growing economies. It has to be growing, otherwise the whole system collapses. Now, the very idea about infinite growth in itself is totally nuts. How do you want a finite planet with finite resources to have infinite growth within itself? It's impossible. Yet nobody has questioned this, or not to the extent that it's forced us to stop and say, well, can I carry on consuming and still have something left to consume tomorrow and the day after and the month after and the year after? So we've had these elaborate calculations which tell us that we have used up the resources that the planet was able to renew every year sooner and sooner in the year. So now I think we are somewhere in the middle of June or May or April. I don't know. It's even irrelevant. But what it means at the very core of it is that we keep on taking without asking ourselves whether tomorrow we are living sufficiently there to be able to renew itself so we can take again, because our whole attitude as far as the planet is concerned is that we are the master of the planet and we're the master of nature, and we are supposed to be able to do whatever we like with the planet. Well, this particular Judeo-Christian attitude to nature, we are there. Nature is being given to us, and we're there to be raping nature to our heart's content, is the very core for many centuries of the evils that was starting to be harbored. But we didn't have the means at the time to totally destroy everything fast enough. So the consequences were relatively limited to geographical areas and timing in history. Unfortunately, at the turn of last century, we managed to stage what was called the Industrial Revolution, and this Industrial Revolution was purely based on the fact that finally we had mastered nature. What a stupid thing to think. Whereas at the same time, we started to realize how enormously infinite the universe was, and how tiny, minute the earth itself was, and what an extraordinary oddity it was for it to give rise to life. Because I guess that if life was teeming all across the universe, somewhere along the line, we might have noticed by now. But it has not been the case. So, as Carl Sagan quietly said, life itself is not the rule. It's the oddity. It's a special thing. And the fact that it has developed during long periods of time, and that we have ended up at the top of the chain, doesn't mean that we can wreck the chain and still be able to stand up. So we keep on consuming. We buy clothes that we don't need, which are coming from the other side of the planet again, because it's obviously cheaper. How can it be cheaper? to buy something on the other side of the planet, which has always been made in your own country until fairly recently? How can it be cheaper to buy food which needs to travel across the globe to be wasted because by the time it arrives it has neither taste nor is it fresh enough to keep, or we've bought too much, or we didn't like it, or whatever the situation was. So with this infinite growth, with this mastering of nature, we've created an enormous unbalance in the biodiversity, because as we were progressing, and so was the population exploding, then we needed to feed people. And instead of feeding people with local ware, we've been feeding people with stuff that we haven't realized needed to be controlled. They needed to be controlled by concerns such as, if I drop the name Monsanto or Bayern, you will probably recognize it. It has been done with a pure economic short-term view of controlling the population through its food security. So we've transformed things which were growing naturally and quite happily, thank you very much, into OGMs or GMOs, which are now dependent on a whole combinations of chemicals to grow, in order to destroy the soils on which it grows, in order to pollute the soil on which and the water on which it grows. Let's speak, for example, about glyphosate, which is a whole subject that we treat in Action Anthropocene. And let's talk about industrial waste, which is being poured literally into rivers at the very moment where I speak, in the very moment when you are hearing this. And this situation is so incredibly hushed under the carpet that until recently, even in a tiny mountain village where I live, people have been found to have glyphosate in their urine, even though most people grow their own vegetables, even though most people eat so-called organic, even though everybody is very careful about what they eat, even though for those who are eating meat, the cows and the sheep and everything else goes out on the mountains during the summertime, and on the winter time they eat grass which has been grown during the summer. So how come that we've got to the situation where people who live as close to nature as possible, like we do still in the mountains here in the south of France, in the Pyrenees, end up having 100% visibility of glyphosate in their own urine? This is a whole topic which is being kept under wraps because enormous economic short-term gains are at stake, and we are not in the situation where we can now just push all these agricultural methods out of the way, not because it's not feasible, because we will demonstrate through the work that we do with Action Anthropocene, the work which we do with the Center for Human and Ecological Changes Transition, that it is perfectly possible to feed the population without being dependent on glyphosate and various chemicals to grow, stop weeds, and so on and so forth, because everything is in balance. But however, we are in the situation where, having used these products for the past 50 or 70 years, our soils are totally eroded. In other words, they are not capable of regenerating themselves. And if you don't plow more chemical, then you don't get any more crops coming out. So we have managed to get ourselves in a situation whereby we are totally dependent on the cycle of evil chemicals to just remain alive. This year, as I'm recording this, for the first time in France, we have become, for this particular cycle year, we are not capable of feeding ourselves. We are normally exporters of food overall. for the rest of the European Union and beyond. This year, apparently, we are only able to produce about 60% of the food that we are going to need to feed the population. Now, can you imagine going from a surplus situation to a situation of lacking about 40%, which is nearly half of what people need to eat? So where is this food going to come from? Because it's not only in France, it's happening all over Europe. It's happening all over the state where the crops are failing, either through extreme weather, too much rain, too much heat, too much drought, too much wind, fires, whatever it is. Crops are failing all over the world. So the reserve, the grain reserve, the food reserves all over the world this year are not producing enough to feed the world's population. I predict, and I'm not the only one, and you don't really need to be Einstein to do that, that when food scarcity starts to become a real possibility, a real event, then the mentality that we have is going to change tremendously. Just imagine what happens when two cars try to park in the same parking space, right? Okay, so you've been there, you've done it, you got the t-shirt. Both people start arguing about the parking space because they need to put their cars there. So what happens when there is two people and one stick of bread? Well, maybe at the beginning they might share it in half, but then comes another 4 people. So this half is going to be shared again, divided by 4. There is going to be a time where people are going to say, no, I don't need an eighth of a piece of bread. I do need a whole piece of bread for my family. And one knows what comes out of that. So the poisoning of the ground means that water is also being poisoned because the ground, carries on the water. The water goes into the river, which is like the bloodstream and the lymphatic system of the earth. And so all these chemicals are being carried away down the streams and into the oceans, where we notice, bizarrely, that the marine life is also dwindling. It's dwindling because the seas and the oceans are getting polluted. It's industrial pollution, once again, chemical pollutions, but it is also, as we mentioned earlier, plastic pollution. So every time you go to the supermarket, every time you buy a organic melon wrapped up in 6 layers of cellophane, just think about what exactly you're doing to the planet and who is the poor animal, or even yourself, because now we've got to the stage where we breathe plastic, where even here in the Pyrenees, it rains plastics. It's coming to the stage that this piece of plastic that you are taking away from the melon, you might just as well eat right away because it's going to end up in your system one way or the other. So when we say that there is a problem and we're not paying attention to the problem, I think the purpose of this video is to make you understand that this problem is not far away. It's not removed from us. We are in the middle of this problem. We are part of this problem. We are actually constituent of this problem. There is no way in which we can disengage ourselves from it because it affects us at every single layer of our own being, every single day, every single hour, every single minute, every single second that we are spending on this planet. Now, there is not only the pollution of water through the river, the rains, the oceans, but there is also another enormous amount of pollutions, which is electromagnetic pollution. And this is something that even less people are talking about. The ones that you know about is obviously everything which has to do with internet, 3Gs, 4Gs, and now we're going to have the immense privilege of having brains being fried in 5Gs, because it just happens that 5Gs work on frequency, which is exactly the frequency of the human brain. And the interference between the electromagnetic waves of 5G and the brains is not going to be able to be avoided. So basically it means that your brain cells are going to be fried. And when you look at situations in towns where 5G has been implemented already, and you see the increase in insanity which are going there, then this is a subject that needs to be spoken about, and is definitely not spoken about because maybe some unfortunate ideas are at stake here and at work. And there is another thing which is very little known about, which is a manipulation of climate, which we'll mention via all the changes in the different layers above the Earth, which constitute its different atmospheres. So air, the total pollution via plastic, the nanoparticles, stopping cars, okay, but this is not going to control the air pollution. The air pollution is due, one of the biggest polluters is not cars, unlike what one is made to believe. The biggest polluters actually are the big ocean ships that I mentioned earlier on, which are carrying your gadget, which you buy into the 1 penny, the $1 shops, and are literally asphyxiating you because it ends up in your body, in the body of your children, in the body of your grandchildren, of your parents, in one way or another, and faster than ever before. The problem is that if we had something that the planet could still be helping us out with, maybe we could get away with much more than this. But at the same time, in our incredible death wish, we are deforesting at a speed which has never been seen before. So I know that you will be reading in newspapers that we are planting more trees than ever before. Well, we couldn't be planting more trees if we hadn't taken them off in the first place. Secondly, the trees that we are planting have not got the same quality as those of what are called primal forest. It takes a forest a minimum of 300 to 500 years before it becomes established. So if you cut a virgin forest today, then it's not until 500 years from now that you will gain the benefit of what you've cut into a single act of total madness, as is being done today in the Amazon. When you hear that people are saying, in Brazil, for example, that, well, it's our forest, we do whatever we like with it, the short-sightedness, the stupidity, the absolute criminality of this statement is beyond belief. It is as if Brazil believes, or rather its president believes, that he's living in a bubble, that Brazil is not touched because it has still got enough forest, and it can make the rest of the planet pay for the oxygen that the Amazon forest is providing. Whereas he can go about and blunder through the rainforest, through the biodiversity, which is disappearing at a rate which is unfathomable, along with all the knowledge of plants, of animals, of flora, of the exquisitely delicate equilibrium in the biosystems that we don't understand, but it doesn't matter, we're still blundering through it as fast as we can. So this deforestation, the destructions of the wetlands, is leading to a desertification because soils cannot renew. They cannot renew with the very few centimeters, and we are literally talking about centimeters, which are containing the mycelium, which is this interconnection of living mushrooms and roots and connections of the flora, which keeps the soil on the earth and which enables us to produce food, forest, and if it's forest, it means obviously oxygens, fixation of carbons, which without which basically we have zero chance of survival. So it's nice to read about it in the papers, and it's nice to say, oh, the guy is really nasty, he shouldn't be doing this. But what you don't understand is that by not taking action, by not physically engaging into, for example, boycotting whatever is being produced by people who are cutting the rainforest, and those things are easy to find out who these people are, then you are literally starving yourself of oxygen and starving yourself of the means to fix carbon, which will contribute to our eventual survival. So deforestation leads to desertification, which leads to this exploding population, which we actually never thought about. How far could we go with population? Because apparently it's a taboo subject. Since the growth in population happens in developing countries to the greatest extent, people have this amazing way of saying, well, it's racist to speak about controlling population in developing countries. Unfortunately, it's nothing to do with racism. It has to do with the fact that the planet can only take so much strain. So how ethically are we going to resolve the population problem? I don't have an answer personally, but I do know that we need to be thinking about it rapidly, because a growth of population to that extent, whilst the natural resources are dwindling, whilst the production of food is also dwindling, can only have one consequence, one result, and that's massive, massive suffering on behalf of a lot of people whom you're not going to be able to feed, you're not going to be able to take care of, you're not going to be able to remain in good health. And if you don't think about it today, then it doesn't matter if you're white, black, yellow, or green. It's simply the resources are not going to be there. So how do we tackle this? Not speaking about it or claiming it's a racist issue is not going to handle the situation. Getting whole populations to migrate from A to B, where momentarily B is slightly less worse off than A, but within a few years will be exactly at the same stage, is not answering the problem. It would be much better to understand how to get A plus B on a good footing so that everybody can live decently and within reason. Unfortunately, we're not thinking about it. We're not dealing with it. We're taking care of the wrong issue and the wrong problem. And that comes from the fact that really we are lacking real information. We have whatever the media wants to feed us with. And the media happens to belong to the same people who keep us into this cycle of neurosis, of inconsistence, of distractions, of total madness, and basically make us believe, but we also choose to believe it, that everything is fine, we just need to consume more and everything will be fine. So I think by now you're starting to understand that you've not been told necessarily all which needs to be told, and nobody's going to come and tell you. So you're going to have to go out and find answers yourself. The more you go on the web, the more you will see that information that comes from the web is more and more restricted. In other words, even what used to be open information is now becoming manipulated information. And you're going to have to be spending a lot more time and a lot more effort in order to be able to find the information which will allow you to make uh, those very, very crucial decisions for yourself and your family. So if you don't use your brains, if you don't use your analytic abilities, you will not understand what's happening. And if you lack reflection, if you lack understanding, then you also will be lacking in compassion, because we are part of this ecosystem. We're not above the ecosystem. We cannot live in absolute isolation from the ecosystem. The ecosystem is the sum of all the beings that are around us, of all the flora and fauna which is around us, of all the elements which are around us. And if we don't understand this, then basically this lack of compassion will simply lead us to our own destruction. So we are not realizing the depths and the consequences of our behavior. We really need to be understanding that what we are doing is not without consequences. It has actually enormous results that we are. So if we don't get to understanding, if we don't get to analyze, then we will not be realizing the depths and the consequences of our behavior. And we will keep on blaming other people for it. Whereas the first people who can actually change something is ourselves. I would like to draw your attention also to nuclear waste. We have created this enormous amount of waste, and barely anybody is speaking about what do we do with it. We think that only activists are interested in what happens to nuclear waste. But nuclear waste is a real dire problem that the whole planet is facing. It's not like we are traveling through space at huge velocity, which is a correct assumption, but we can just drop the waste somewhere in the universe and it's going to go away. It just doesn't work like this. So what are we doing with it? And why we keep on constructing nuclear stations where we jolly well know that, first of all, the fuel for it is getting very low, and on the other hand also that the waste that we are producing, we have no idea what to do with. Let's look, for example, at the Germans who have tried to dismantle their nuclear stations and have absolutely no clue what to do with their waste. Or let's think about what the Americans are doing. They are simply putting everything into ordinary barrels and leaving that on the coastline until they find another solution for it. Well, let's wait for the next big storm. Let's wait for the next tsunami, as in Japan, to create lots more Fukushimas or lot more Chernobyl. And as we know, the half-life of this nuclear waste goes well beyond generations of human people. So somewhere along the line, the Anthropocene is definitely there, because those isotopes that are found in nuclear waste or in nuclear explosions, let's talk about the explosions of Hiroshima, have created substances which were not existing naturally. So Anthropocene carries its name correctly. It's a creation by man, by human beings, of stuff which were not in the record of the planet previously. And if it was not enough that we've managed to pollute the soils, if it was not enough that we've managed to pollute the water, if it was not enough that we've managed to completely mess up the oceans, we are also now have completely messed up space, because let's just talk about the enormous amount of satellites and other rockets and other space objects that we're sending around, so-called to help our civilizations. But all this have consequences in the way in which the Earth atmosphere is behaving. And when you are adding to this horrendous discoveries in how to manipulate the various layers of this atmosphere, then once again we are creating troubles for ourselves that we have zero understanding of how to deal with. So, should we do something about it? And what can we do about it if we think that we should do something about it? Well, I think first of all that not doing anything probably means, or assuredly means, committing suicide, because what we've put into motion is not going to disappear. And if it's not going to disappear, then it's going to carry on having enormous havoc circumstances and consequences. So somewhere along the line, putting your head under your wing or under the sand is not going to make the problem go away. It's the same attitude that expects other people to fix our mess. And we've discussed this on a couple of occasions previously, so I'm not going to go back to this. But the real issue here is that we've reached a tipping point where we no longer control what's going to be happening and at which speed it's going to be happening. One of the very examples that we can quote for this is what is happening with the methane. Methane is an extremely volatile and inflammatory gas which has been locked into the planet in two main parts. The first one is under what was called the permafrost, the areas which were totally sealed by ice since the last glaciation, and were containing the methane in a form in which it couldn't escape into the atmosphere. The second part has been under the sea for the same reason, at great depth, with a temperature which was sufficiently low to keep the methane incapable of being releasing back to the surface of the ocean. With the warming of the ocean, however, this is no longer the case, and scientists are recording with great alarm larger and larger amount of methane which is coming up to the surface and mingling with our atmosphere, to the point that we are not far from the area where simply the air is going to become unbreathable for human beings, let alone other flora and fauna. So I want us to understand that the problem that we've created with rapid warming of the planet is not without incredible consequences. I don't say that there is something that we can do tomorrow morning, but although there are some things that we can do even today. But ignoring it is definitely going to sign us off the planet and every other life with it. I also, kind of would like to point out that methane is used industrially to actually create explosions. So let's not go there. So what can we do something about it? And if then, what is it and how can we deal with it? So this is the next part of what we're going to be talking about. So can we do something about it then? And what is it that we can do about it? Well, the first thing obviously is to become aware that there is a problem and that the problem is not going to go away. And then we need to understand the issues. What exactly are they? And how are they impacting us directly and not only indirectly in an uncertain future? They impact us today. Today you're breathing nanoparticles. Today you are eating plastic. Today, your bodies are full of chemicals. Today, we are facing a food scarcity situation within the next few crops. So we're not talking about an uncertain future. We're talking about what's going on today, and that's what we're going to have to fix if we're going to survive. So what is it that we can do? Well, first of all, we need to be starting with fixing all the small issues that we can have an immediate control over and have a real impact. And this, I would suggest, has to do with our consumerism, with our consuming behavior. Think about what you buy. Think about how you buy it. Think about what happens with the wrappings, what happens with the waste. There are a lot of There are a lot of initiatives which are taking place and have to do with zero waste. They are not perfect, but certainly they are more perfect than doing nothing. You can always improve on something, but if you're waiting for the perfect solution straight away, then you're never going to start. So we have, for example, challenges, and I will be speaking about it in the last part of these videos, which enables you to, within a few days, start becoming aware of what it is that we do on a daily basis, how much waste we are producing, how differently we could be acting, what enormous amount of stuff we are not utilizing and that we could be leaving, how we could be recycling, how we could be having a different type of economy, which is based on localization, which is based on proximity, which is based on communities, which are going back to the way in which villages, small towns, or even bigger towns organized in smaller districts used to operate, because people knew how to help each other and how to produce for each other and how to cater for most of their needs within the limit of that community to start off with. So people are often reacting by saying, well, should we go back to the Middle Ages? And my reaction is, we've got two choices. We either go back to a way of life which respects the cycle of nature and allows it to regenerate itself so that we can carry on living in it, or you're not going to have to worry about which side of history you're going to live, because there is not going to be any more planet for you to live on. That's what we really, really, really need to understand. So how are these communities going to be organized? How is food going to be produced? How is your lifestyle going to be changing? How is your attitude to life? How is education? How is relationship with nature going to be organized? These are all things that we carry out in a program which is called Let's Rethink Life, where we literally take apart all the assumptions that we've built over the last 50 or 60 years, assuming that we need to be producing more, assuming that we need to be consuming more, assuming that we need to be growing more, assuming that we need to make money out of money, assuming that businesses have to exist for the sake of existing, assuming that people are moving all over the place and population keep exploding whilst soils are being degrading. All these things have to be put back into under the microscope, and there is no possibility to avoid doing that, because I think I explained sufficiently clearly what real scientists, serious scientists, are trying to explain to us now, even though they may be muzzled by other powers that are paying their wages at the moment. Most people are in sciences who know their science realize that we have come close to the tipping point. We may even have passed it, And the only way we're going to get ourselves out of this mess is by totally reconsidering what we have taken for granted in our lifestyles. So once again, we'll be talking of the program called Let's Rethink Life, which helps us to unravel and look at all these issues and look for issues which are working for us. The next thing, which is our problem, is that even though sometimes we come to think about these problems, we are under a total deluge of distractions. Think about everything that is bombarding you, asking for your attention on a daily basis. Some staggering figures say that you're being subjected to, I don't know how many hundreds of adverts per day, of telephone calls, of SMS, of social media calls, of notifications, of whatever it is. You have never a minute to yourself where you can sit down, pause, and reflect, what on earth is going on here? And how am I going to be dealing with this? Because within the next fraction of a second, something else will have bombarded you, and dragged by the power of habit, you will have followed that thought, which brings you on to another thought and another thought. And before you know where you are, you can't even remember where you started from, and you can't even remember what you were trying to achieve. So distractions is our worst enemy. And if we don't learn methodology, if we don't manage to discipline ourselves to understand that this is a main reason why we're being taken down the plug hole, if we don't learn how to understand our emotions, if we don't learn how to understand how we are dragging from one area to the other, then we will never give ourselves the space to find solutions. And whether the solutions are about survival or the solutions are about coping with a situation that maybe is beyond repair in the way in which we understand it, still, the purpose of our life is not to be dragged into catastrophes after catastrophes and robbing ourselves from the means to be able to do something about it. So definitely the crisis which we are living today forces us to review what we call life, forces us to review the meaning of life, forces us to reevaluate what's happening from the ground up. So definitely we can do things about it, and we must do something about it. And there are, apart from this first initial consideration that we have discussed just now, there are other things that need to be taken into account. We need to go deep instead of going wide. We spend our time multitasking, and in the multitasking we end up doing nothing, and we certainly don't go deep, and we don't see connections within things. We're incapable of analyzing a whole string of information, of data, and making sense of it. For example, we don't correlate the fact that we are going off to the sales to buy more clothes, more shoes, more t-shirts, more tables, more this, more that, with the fact that somewhere boats have had to travel across oceans, distributing large amount of waste and pollution, which in turn we are going to be eating, drinking, and breathing. We need to understand this. We need to think about it. And we need to think, okay, how can I deal with what I need in life without creating more problems for myself? So we need to go this deep whilst we re-educate ourselves to understand the real issues and focus on solutions which may be very, very, very different, or which have to be very, very different from the ones that we have selected so far. The next thing is that really, as long as you are waiting for governments, politics, people in charge, people in leadership, in so-called leadership, to bring you the solutions, you are wasting your time. They are not going to tell you about it, and they're not going to fix it because they're human as well. Because on top of it, they are probably plagued with an enormous amount of greed and imbecility. Then you are not going to be able to say, well, please, let's fix this for me because you did this in the past and see where it brought us. So what you really need to get to is take your responsibility. Understand that if any change is going to come, it's going to come from within you. And the first change that needs to take place is that you get to know yourself. You get to know how you react. You get to know what makes you angry. You get to know how makes you excited. You get to know what makes you greedy. You get to know how you react to circumstances. So you can start taming your own mind to find solutions to problems which aren't going to go away. So if somebody is not going to fix it for us, then we need to fix it. And very often, we don't have all the skills to fix all the problems that we have around us. So what needs to happen is that we create tribes, like in the olden days. Tribes were a group of people who had different skills among them, who acquired different skills among them to allow the community to not only survive, but thrive and become optimized and grow and basically enjoy life. So we need to do our own tribe homework. The first one, obviously, is to create your own tribe. Find out people who have similar interests to you and be able to join in small communities, in small interest groups, in small learning groups, in small support groups, where each other's skill will be supporting the rest of the people in your small community. Once you have a group of people that you can rely on, then you'll be able to start thinking about what really is the state of the earth. What can I learn about it? What must I understand about it? Because if I don't understand about it, I can't do anything about it. So who can help me see the things that I can't see? There is nothing worse than somebody who doesn't know what they don't know. And if they don't have somebody else with them that happens to know a little bit of what they don't know, then, this is going to be a never-ending story and a not good ending story. So find out, really spend time to understand what is the state of this earth, what is the state of this planet which has been holding us and that we've been destroying, like cutting the branch of the tree on which we're sitting. What does it mean of the loss of biodiversity means to us? If there are no biodiversity, it means that the ecological system, the balance that we've had so far, has been disturbed and is being destructed. So if we barely survived with the existing ecosystem, and we are wreaking havoc in that ecosystem, what do you think is going to happen to our lives? How do you think we're going to survive this? It's not by creating AI. It's not by creating robots. It's not by developing some kind of magical stupidity that we're going to be doing better than what the Earth has been doing for millions of years. Because don't forget, what the Earth did for millions of years, we've managed to wreck in the last, let's be generous, 100 years. So I don't think that our intelligence is going to be catching up with the wisdom of such finely tuned ecosystem, which has managed to give rise to such invaded species as Homo non-sapiens sapiens. So the meaning and the loss of the biodiversity is definitely something that we need to understand right down to its deepest core, because only when we understand what's happening and how it affects us will we start being able to respect it, and by respecting it, it's finding solutions to the problem of the havoc that we've created. Food, securing and producing food is going to be our main priority, along with water, preserving and managing water. No water, no life. No food, no life. No water, no food. Everything is interconnected. And what we've managed to do at the moment is creating a lot of water which is totally unusable, as melting the ice cap, and creating changes in the weather patterns which are unsuitable for the way in which we have organized our civilizations in order to be able to survive. So food securing needs to happen, but it will not happen with the mass agriculture which has brought about the havoc that we have today. We're going to need to get back to producing food locally, in season, and relearning how to preserve it without drawing on resources such as nuclear power or dam power or whatever, which creates even more problems than what we have today. And this is part of the course that we have at the center, which will start early next year, and teaches people how to become self-sufficient, either for themselves and their family, or within the framework of small communities. It is perfectly capable, it's perfectly possible, and it has been demonstrated time over again that you can create local supplies for people and for communities. You can make food grow in deserts, and deserts turn green again. It's not that we don't have the technology, is that something is fucked up in our brains. And if we don't fix what we fucked up in our brains, then nobody's going to eat. And everybody's going to fight for the few grains of wheat or maize or a few vegetables which are going to be available for eating. So I suggest we learn how to do this again as soon as possible. Soils can be regenerated, they can be restructured, we can reverse the destructions of soils, and it can happen much faster than what people make us believe. There have been some scientists, there have been some people who have been incredibly close to the earth, who have warned for decades that we were destroying the very food producing facility that we had by destroying the soils. But we also know how to regenerate those soils. Again, it's not a technical problem, it's a brain problem. It's really, are we going to be able to regain our senses sufficiently to act quickly and efficiently in restructuring the soils? Or are we going to lose the very little bits that we've got left and end up in massive wars and chaos for the little bit that's going to be left? We need to get to understand what really is happening with glyphosate. I have, within the programs that we are preparing for the Center of Human and Ecological Transition that I mentioned a couple of times, we have programs which explain the devilish, because there is no other word for it, activity which stems from the transformation of war substances in the First and Second World War via the Vietnam War, and which now are ending up in your plate under the form of Roundup and glyphosate. It's ending up in your plate, it's poisoning the water, it's poisoning the oceans, it's creating terrible health issues. And you and I, until I started to learn about the problem decades ago, don't know anything about it. And we still don't understand all the consequences of it, except that today there are very, very courageous doctors and researchers who are putting together the whole picture of glyphosate. It's not just agriculture, it's not just farmers who are dying by utilizing polluting chemicals on land. It's the whole ecosystem. and the vastness of the situation is only matched by our inability to understand it. So nuclear, we spoke about it. What are we doing? What are we going to do with the aging plants? What are we going to do with the waste? All of these are issues that we need to be thinking about within tribes and exchanging like nodes in the nervous system. Whatever a tribe doesn't know, another tribe might know. And so exchange of information is absolutely vital. As you've probably become aware, information is no longer circulating freely, at least not all information. Information is being fed to us in ways which is forming, which is formatting our own thoughts, and we need to break free from it, and we need to get back to circulating information which is saving instead of destroying. Oceans, ice cap, methane bomb, literally, we have discussed this. And the other issues that I've not really mentioned so far, but which also is incredibly disturbing, is the fact that the pole is moving much faster than it has ever moved. So fast, in actual fact, that we're going to have to, they had to recalibrate the compasses. And when you get to that stage of recalibrating compasses, then you know that things have happened in the past. It's been called pole shifts. It means that the North Pole becomes the South Pole, and it has with consequences the whole movement of the electromagnetic organization of the Earth, which, as you can probably start guessing, doesn't do its inhabitants an awful lot of good. So we are going to be looking also at these issues in our programs, in particular, Let's Rethink Life. So above and beyond, there are life ethical questions. When we find out that when we started off saying, well, we have some problems, we see there are some problems, and we're starting to dig deeper, we've understood that these problems are actually much more connected with our own way of being and our own life than we'd ever thought before. So we ended up with, or we are ending up with, what I call a multi-speed population awareness. You have some people who are becoming very, very aware of something going drastically wrong and have various degrees of understanding what are the real causes of these tremendous changes and collapses which are in front of us or happening already. And then you have people who are living in total denial for reason XYZ. These people who are living in denial are not going to be excluded from the consequences of the result of this collapse. And what we need to understand is when things start to really happen, as my friends the other side of the pond say, when shit hit the fan, the circumstances are not going to be putting people who don't believe in this out of trouble. On the contrary, because they're going to be totally unprepared. And so this is going to create huge amount of conflicts, whether they are psychological conflicts or more precisely, they're going to become material conflicts, because when people are hungry and they need to feed their family and they need to feed themselves, they're not nice. It's not a nice story. When they are thirsty, it's not nice. When they lack every minimum amount of comfort, it's not nice. We've seen this in the huge conflicts that have been ravaging the Middle East in the last couple of decades. Basically, people become like animals. And the fact that we have a population which is growing at a very, very uneven pace in terms of understanding what is happening to the planet and what it needs to be done about it, does not forebode well about the way in which these people are going to clash when when they are faced with the hardcore reality of food scarcity, water scarcity, rising sea levels, huge natural catastrophes as we've seen across the planet. Think about Puerto Rico, which has been hit by several huge storms and have been left for months, now years, without proper help from authorities. So these people have had to get themselves organized and start doing things, right? How is this going to happen when it's not just Puerto Rico, but it's, say, the whole of the United States, or it's the whole of North America, or it's the whole of South America, or it's South America plus Australia plus. We need to start getting to understand that this is not going to stop tomorrow morning just because we're not thinking about it. It's only going to get worse. So how are we going to cope with it? How are we going to manage conflicts? How are we going to improve communications and information so that we can mitigate the worst of situations? This, I think, needs to be thought about. This is what I call the ethical life questions. It's a little bit like saying, who is going to survive and who is not going to survive, and what's going to be the criteria for surviving. Because as you probably understood, these questions are dealing with our very survival on the planet, and the very survival is not happening in 2050 or 2100. It's happening now, where nobody expected it to be so fast. Not even people who, like me and my friends, have been thinking about this and seeing this coming since the mid-70s and 80s, where it was quite obvious that if we didn't change course, things would really become bad. But even I was not expecting to have to live through it. And today I have to sit down and think, okay, this is going to happen. What do I do about it? And how do I manage helping other people as much as possible to mitigate what's already happening? There are people who are already in tremendous amount of difficulties. You don't have to look at migrants. You need to be able to look in your own country, whether you are in France, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Germany, in Spain. There are people in the street. There are people suffering, even before we bring any migrants over. They are the migrants of our own societies. They are the elderly people. They are the people who have fallen off the social ladder. They are people who are desperately needing help because they can't feed themselves or their family. So problems are there today. And we are still in a situation where technically we can feed everybody. So just imagine where technically we can't feed everybody. What's going to happen? I beg you to think about it, because this is going to be the questions that you're going to have to face very rapidly. So when we're talking about collapse, we need to think about what kind of collapse are we talking about? Are we talking about societal collapse? Are we talking about ecological collapse? Are we talking about planetary collapse? What kind is this going to be? And there is going to be a need for very, very strong adjustments to that collapse. And in order to adjust to that collapse, it's not only technical or food or water solutions that we're going to need to find, but there is psychological consequences of collapse. Imagine this enormous amounts of suffering which is going to be generated through making people more and more vulnerable, more and more hungry, more and more thirsty, more and more in need of comfort, more and more in need of help. There is going to be a tremendous amount of psychological help needed. And there is going to be a tremendous amount of health resources required. Today, our health system is based on totally ridiculous amount of technology, which doesn't understand the connection between mind and body, which doesn't understand how to deal with the person as a whole. You know, they don't understand that if you have a pain in your finger, it could be created by an organ somewhere else. We have totally lost the means to take care of ourselves, of maintaining our homeostasis, of maintaining our own ability to regenerate basic functions, because we've become totally dependent. We have allowed ourselves to become totally dependent on so-called modern medicine, which has created more problems than it has been able to solve. So the future of the planet is in our hands. The future of our health is in our hands. The future of our survival is in our hands. But for how long? I think these are questions which are probably more interesting than trying to flick through the various channels on Netflix. So to conclude this presentation video, I would like to say, okay, got this. Well, at least I'm starting to get the idea that something is not really right and that I need to do something about it. But now what? What can we do? What can I do today? What can I organize? How can I start? Where do I go? What's happening? So I don't have a solution for the planet because, obviously I'm only a small person. However, I have really thought about this for a long period of time. And I think we got together with members of my family and small team, and we're starting to get a setup to work from. Because without organization, things are going to be really even more difficult. So what's happening is that we are creating a whole structure which is designed to support and help as much as possible in real terms, in action today, to find solutions and to bring awareness to people, to help them cope with these tremendous changes which are already underfoot. The first part of this structure is to create two non-profits. The first non-profit, which has the name of this video, is called Action Anthropocene. Action Anthropocene is because obviously we are the one who've created this mess, and it's not by ignoring it that something is going to change. So we need to take action. And this first non-profit is going to be the funnel through which we can funnel funds from individuals and businesses towards training programs which will help people get organized, learn basic skills again, how to feed themselves, how to clothe themselves, how to take care of each other, how to rethink their life, how to create and lead communities on a tangible level. So this non-profit Action Anthropocene is the means by which we inform, we connect with other structures who are doing similar kind of work, how we communicate, how we make these issues known, and how we can contribute to helping people get educated to acquire those basic skills that I mentioned earlier on. The second nonprofit is basically dedicated to people, or it's been set up for people who want to make donations in kind. When we set up, when we teach people how to create permaculture setup, for example, and I want to be using this word with a lot of caution, I would like to be talking more about regenerative actions, about different regenerative lifestyles, whereby you learn how to feed yourself, you learn how to keep water or purify water, you learn how to generate zero waste by recycling and producing energy out of your waste, and you learn how to take care of whatever is left of the biodiversity and hopefully regenerate the biodiversity as much as possible. learn how to deal with technical questions which are due to pollutions and how to deal with it on a practical level. And so you need material in order to do that. You need land and you need objects. So the second nonprofit is to be able to collect from individuals and businesses whatever they feel they want to participate in, whether it's land, properties that are then given to people who have demonstrated skills in being able to do something positive with them, whether it is also tools. If electricity doesn't become the norm, how do you deal with everyday life? And even if electricity is fine, how do you become much more optimized, not in a commercial sense, but in a practical sense, because you're probably not going to have the same facilities as what you have today. So the second nonprofit is to help with everything, donations in kind, for want of a better word. And then we have a training center, which happens to be a physical educational center with residential facilities where we can accommodate around 100 students at a time, where we actually run the programs. So it's not just learning from it, about it, via the internet, as long as we've got internet, but it's also learning how to do things in situ. So you have a whole period of theoretical learning which gives you the basis which you can come to the centers and put into action. So how can you get involved? Well, you have different ways which I can think of just with us, and I'm sure we're not the only ones, but I'm going to be speaking about what we can offer that you can choose from. You can obviously then come and choose and follow a program out of the programs that we're offering. They are all basically either a day visit to the center, some challenges which are helping you to become more aware of the situations that you are in and how you can save troubles for yourself and for your family, how you can save money as well, because if you learn to take care of whatever it is that you consume, then you're going to make savings immediately. And you are also going to learn how to do things, for example, preparing food or growing food, or seeing how you can set up a community. All of this is going to be happening from our centers. The first ones in France, some are planned in England, in the States, and in various other parts of the world. So you can choose and follow a program, and if you need help to choose and follow a program that makes sense to you, that you feel you are able to connect with, so that you can get on the path of at least internal recovery and action, then we have what I call the initial consultation, which helps you to determine what kind of action you can take, what kind of preparation you can take, which makes more sense for you and your family. And then you can support the nonprofits either in kind or financially or by volunteering. There are all kinds of things that you will find in our site, which I have put here for you, which is called I'm going the wrong way around, which is called en.actionanthropocene.com. And you can also find us, as long as there is a Facebook group, on the Facebook group actionanthropocene.en. So it's basically all the same words that are used to give some ways in which you can start doing something for yourself. The first one of which is obviously to expand your awareness and find solutions which are making sense for you. And then you have the last part, which is learning how to create or join a support community. Because when things really start getting complicated, we are going to need to have people that we can trust around us. And it's not at the time where things are falling apart that you need to start creating those communities. Today, everything has been done to destroy communities. Everything is being done to divide people. Everything is being done to make people argue with each other over subjects which have absolutely zero relevance. So learning what a community is, learning how to create one, learning how to join one, learning how to behave in one, learning how to benefit and offer in one, is a skill that's not going to be invented at the time of need. It's a skill that we really ought to be acquiring right now. So this has been a little bit of a long presentation, but you don't present the history of the Earth in such a transitional time in 2 seconds flat. I probably have forgotten zillions of things. I'm sure you're going to have you're going to have questions, and I'm sure that I'm not going to have all the answers. But in as much as it is possible, I will try to answer your questions. I will try to come back to you for as long as I can with ideas, with suggestions, with, in particular, some very concrete help as to how to be able to deal with this time, because there is too much to do, because there is too little time to prepare, because what's happening is happening so fast that even the best prepared among us are being taken by surprise. So suffering is already there. It's part of life. Ending suffering means that we reach higher level of consciousness. This higher level of consciousness are no longer part of our daily occupations, are no longer part of our daily thoughts, are no longer part of our daily concerns. But it doesn't mean that we're going to survive with carrying on the way in which we've done so. So we're going to have to start thinking. And this presentation is basically an initial attempt to bring attention to all these subjects, and the fact that whilst I'm bringing attention to these subjects, I am also trying to, in my own little way, create some solutions to be able to find ways out of this situation. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I'm looking forward to questions, feedback, suggestions, and I'm not expecting everyone to agree with me. Obviously, any suggestions to improve it will be warmly received. Having said that, I wish you an excellent end of your day and a lot of courage to start reflecting on what's essentially unavoidable. Thank you very much.